From rumored mafia conspiracies to high-profile assassinations and terrible accidents, tragedy strikes everywhere, even for the world's biggest leaders. Benazir Bhutto was the first female prime minister of Pakistan. She rose to power in 1988 after the end of General Zia al-Haq's military regime. Her reign didn't last long. She fell out of favor with the military government of President Pervez Musharraf and went into exile. In 2007, she was finally able to return to Pakistan after Musharraf granted her amnesty. Upon Bhutto's return, it became clear that not everyone in the country's power structure wanted her back. In October 2007, a suicide bomber blew himself up, missing her but killing over 150 people. But then in December, another suicide bomber shot her twice and detonated himself near her motorcade as she was leaving an election rally, killing more than 20 people altogether. Bhutto's death triggered mourning, protests, and rioting in Pakistan. There was speculation that government insiders orchestrated the plots, while Pakistan's inter-services intelligence blamed Osama bin Laden. Considering the enemies Bhutto had in her home country, an assassination by government elements in cooperation with militants is perfectly plausible. President John F. Kennedy's charm, wealth, Harvard degree, and war hero status all lent a fairy tale air to his time in the White House. He exuded optimism through his commitment to peace, promotion of intellectual life, and dedication to space exploration. But the dream ended on November 22, 1963, when he was killed during a campaign stop in Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for the assassination, but he was soon killed himself by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby. According to the subsequent Warren Commission, it was determined that Oswald acted alone. But the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded in 1978 that Kennedy had been hit by at least 2 gunmen, suggesting that the event was a conspiracy. Oswald's record as a CIA asset also fueled suspicion. In 1971, conspiracy advocates were possibly vindicated when a man named Loy Factor claimed to have been hired as a gunman, along with Oswald and at least 2 others. Factor claimed that conspirators paid him to help shoot Kennedy, but he also claimed he never fired. In the decades since, Kennedy's death has continued to fuel passionate conspiracy theories. The FBI tried 2 sets of tests. Not one of their sharpshooters could match Oswald's performance. Not one. The last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, met a particularly horrific end. He abdicated his throne during the 1917 Russian Revolution, but he was hardly a tyrant, as he was devoted to his family and his people. Despite Nicholas's abdication and desire to leave Russia, the Bolsheviks decided to execute the imperial family. They marched the Tsar, his wife Alexandra, his children and his servants into a basement and lined them up. They were then quickly killed, and their bodies were dumped in shattered graves. Decades later, in 1998, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Tsar's remains were returned to St. Petersburg, where he was given a state funeral and properly laid to rest. Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie was an accomplished man. He steered his country through Italian occupation, World War II, modernization, and the abolition of slavery. But in 1974, he was overthrown in a coup by the Soviet-backed communist Derg regime. In August of the following year, he died in his sleep while in Derg custody. As it turned out, though, the world media was fed a lie by the communist regime. In 1994, Ethiopia charged a handful of former Derg officials in absentia for 2,000 murders and disappearances. The charges reportedly rested on damning documents revealed after the regime's fall in 1991. Derg leader Mengistu Haile Mariam had ordered Selassie to be strangled in his sleep, or, according to some other accounts, smothered with a pillow. Either way, the emperor was in no condition to offer any resistance. Nowadays, Selassie is seen as an African icon and an inspiration to the people of African descent around the world. He even sent Ethiopian Orthodox missionaries to Jamaica at the request of the Rastafarians. And famed reggae singer Bob Marley was baptized into the church with the name Burhana Selassie in honor of the man he once considered the Messiah. John Paul I was elected Pope in 1978 on the heels of the controversial Pope Paul VI and the Second Vatican Council, which made a number of changes to the Catholic Church to better confront the modern world. But after only 33 days, tragedy struck as 2 nuns found the new pontiff dead in his bedroom. John Paul I reportedly suffered a heart attack, although inconsistent statements from his secretary, Bishop John Maggie, led to speculation that he'd been murdered. New York City mobster Anthony Raimondi claimed in his book, When the Bullet Hits the Bone, that Cardinal Paul Marcinkus had personally poisoned the Pope to avoid discovery of stock fraud and corruption involving the highest levels of Vatican bureaucracy. There's something wrong with the Pope, Something wrong with the Pope. Doctor comes in, Pope is dead. Regardless of the cause, John Paul I's death was tragic, not only for the brevity of his tenure, but also because he was a truly beloved figure who had dedicated his tenure as Patriarch of Venice to the service of the poor. His death cleared the way for the election of John Paul II, who played a role in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. Former Polish President Lech Kaczynski was involved with the anti-communist Solidarity movement as an advisor during the Gdansk shipyard strike of 1980. He soon became Solidarity leader Lech Walenka's right-hand man and engineered Walenka's election as the president in Poland's first post-communist democratic elections in 1990. Eventually, Kaczynski became president himself in 2005 as part of the conservative Nationalist Law and Justice Party. But his dedication to securing American and NATO support for Poland's security set him on a crash course with Russian President Vladimir Putin. 2010 was the 70th anniversary of the Katyn Forest massacre, wherein the Soviet secret police liquidated Poland's elite and blamed the Nazis for it. Putin snubbed Kaczynski and invited his old political opponent Donald Tusk to a commemoration of the event. Kaczynski decided to attend a separate commemoration in the Russian city of Smolensk, but he never reached his destination. Kaczynski's plane went down in thick fog, and the tragedy was ruled an accident. But since it happened on Putin's watch, theories quickly emerged that Russia was involved in a state-level assassination. After 3 investigations, Poland concluded that Russia had tampered with the plane and covered it up by refusing to hand over the remains for investigation. The case remains unresolved and has continued to contribute to tensions between Poland and Russia in the years since. When you've got the president of a country on board and other dignitaries, the pressure on that pilot to get that airplane where it was supposed to go is incredibly high. Former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin famously signed the Oslo Accords with Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat in 1993 and 1995. The treaties established Palestinian self-government in the Gaza Strip and West Bank on the road to a 2-state solution. But the accords were far from perfect, and extremist organizations like the Palestinian militant Islamic group Hamas rejected them. Nevertheless, they were hailed as a step in the right direction, and with Rabin at the head, Israel had a leader that Palestine might be willing to negotiate with. Sadly, though, during a 1995 peace rally, Rabin was fatally shot by Yigal Amir, a Jewish law student who opposed the concessions to the Palestinians. 1 million mourners attended Rabin's funeral in Tel Aviv, where the Israeli leader was eulogized as a soldier of peace. Numerous theories of a larger conspiracy involving complicity from Israeli government organizations have circulated in the years since. Rabin's death is even more tragic when considering what could have happened if he'd lived. He reportedly had the respect of most of the Israeli political establishment. Thus, if he hadn't been killed, his country very well could have been more united and better equipped to deal with the Palestinian crisis than it is in its divided state today. King George VI, the father of Elizabeth II, met his end in his sleep on February 6, 1952. The announcement of his passing shocked Great Britain and the rest of the world. He was only 56, and he left behind a successor in the form of his 25-year-old daughter, whom many people feared was incapable of managing the monarchy in the modern world. But George should never have been king in the first place. As an awkward prince, he lived in the shadow of his charming and handsome brother Edward. And though Edward became king in 1936, he eventually abdicated to marry American divorcee Wanda Simpson. Thus, George ascended to the throne left empty by his brother amidst an increasingly dangerous Europe on the verge of war. To make matters worse, Edward began socializing with Britain's soon-to-be enemies, such as Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. After surviving the German bombing campaign known as the Blitz, Edward returned from a stay in the Caribbean and asked for George to accept his wife as part of the royal family. The entire ordeal, coupled with the stress of the war, ultimately broke George. And so, the king died in his sleep, and Elizabeth reportedly blamed her uncle for cutting her father's life short with his selfishness. I can read you every bit as well as you can read me. Boris Tchaikovsky became president of the small Republic of North Macedonia in 1999. The Methodist pastor-turned-politician began an anti-corruption campaign that saw numerous government officials removed from their posts. After an Albanian insurgency broke out in 2001, Tchaikovsky fought the rebels, many of whom had come from neighboring Kosovo. He also courted NATO assistance to ensure that the Albanian rebels didn't find sympathy with Macedonia's Albanians, or with the Kosovar refugees that had sought shelter during their conflict with Yugoslavia. Macedonia, already an ethnically diverse state, certainly did not need a civil war. The parties ultimately agreed to the NATO-brokered Ohrid Accord, which provided Macedonia's Albanians autonomy where they were the majority. At this point, Macedonia seemed to be on the right path by avoiding civil war, and Tchaikovsky was prominently involved in the process every step of the way. But his tenure was cut short when the plane he was in crashed over the Bosnian city of Mostar. Despite claims that the aircraft had been shot down, investigations revealed that it was not in adequate condition to fly, nor was the flight crew prepared to deal with the foggy weather. In other words, a plane should never have taken off in the first place. Despite his tragic passing, Tchaikovsky's legacy has held firm, though there are occasional tensions between Albanians and Macedonians. The absence of a new insurgency indicates that his work was not in vain. In December 1953, Ramon Magsaysay was sworn in amidst pomp and ceremony as the new president of the Republic of the Philippines. He promised to reform and extend the benefits of the government to all 20 million citizens of his country. Of humble origins, this larger-than-life president was considered both a man of the people and a puppet of the CIA. The truth lay somewhere in between. While Magsaysay certainly courted the United States for aid, he had to balance American interests with those of the Philippines' traditional elite, planters, the Catholic Church, and industrialists. And of course, he also had to be concerned about the masses of his country. Magsaysay won the 1953 election with the backing of his broad coalition, and promised to ram through land reform and break a communist-led peasant uprising. He was known for being incorruptible, and perhaps this unwillingness to get his hands dirty contributed to his political opponents stymieing his reform attempts. Unfortunately for his supporters, Magsaysay's frustrated but still promising tenure was cut short in 1957 when the plane he was on crashed. It went down on a return flight to Manila from the southern island of Cebu. It crashed into a tree and killed all but one passenger. 2 million people attended Magsaysay's funeral, a sign of a much-loved leader whose tenure had promised so much. Thanks for watching our video. Press the red subscribe button for interesting facts and documentary.